Yo, what's up guys? We're finally looking at a game that's been long overdue and one of the most classic games of all time, the first generation of Pokemon. In this case, Pokemon Yellow. You have no idea how excited I am reviewing this game and series. Pokemon is the first game I have any memory playing, and with about 50 million sales, I'm sure some of you can relate. Well, my first Pokemon was actually Generation 2, but we'll talk about that another day. For now, let's talk about where the entire series started and if it's still worth playing. The first generation of Pokemon. For some of us, this is as nostalgic as it gets. Pokemon Yellow came out in 1998 in Japan and 1999 in the US. This game literally came out the year I was born. Pokemon Yellow is the more updated version of Red and Blue with some quality to life features, but I'm sure it's not hard to tell that this came out on the Game Boy. Remember those old school cartridges? What a historical piece of art we have right there. But I'm sure the first thing that hits you in the face with Generation 1 is the graphics. This will be the first test that separates the boys from the men. Can all the newer Pokemon players handle this? Does it hurt your eyes? Do you need a tissue? Are you a little bitch? Alright, I can understand why the graphics might turn some of you off, but this is what the game was like in 1998, and it's a unique experience playing the same game as back then. I know the sprites were a little updated in Pokemon Yellow compared to Red and Blue, but it's nostalgic looking back at how these games looked visually. You even have to use a bit of your imagination sometimes. A good example of this is looking at a gym leader before battling them. Like, you can't tell that's Brock and that's Misty. And if you can't use your imagination in a game where you play as a 10-year-old, you probably wouldn't be able to enjoy South Park either. Playing these games as a kid definitely helps with that, as well as knowing some history and context of the series. But can you argue with that music? I know they didn't perfect the sprites the first time around, but do you hear that fire? I feel like a happy child again. I know I'm biased, but I think the first Pokemon games have some of the most iconic music in gaming, like the beautiful harmonies in Halo. The songs from these different towns, cities, caves, Pokemon centers, battling, and everything you can think of has been burned into my head for 2 decades now. The graphics mixed with the music just add so much charm for all the old people like me. Even the sounds weren't that bad. I know a lot of the battle cries can sound similar, but they're mostly fitting for each Pokemon. And don't get me started on how Pikachu sounds. He sounds so screechy and might hurt your ears, but god damn it do I love it. Just don't let him faint or you'll feel terrible. Having Pikachu around feels like the best companion for your journey, like a boy and his dog. Or in this case, a boy and his electric mouse, but it's cool having your little buddy along for the ride as you travel around Kanto. I admit, it's pretty adorable when he hops on the counter at the Pokemon Center. He even has his own happiness system. It's very basic and you only need it once very early on, but it's nice to make sure your Pikachu is happy. There's some unique moments with Pikachu that make it feel more special and remind you of the show, like how Ash didn't want to evolve his Pikachu in the show, so you can't do it in the game, and how Jesse and James will randomly appear and say their catchphrase when you beat them. But the one time that happiness system does come in handy is to get a Bulbasaur. And yeah, that's right, even though Pikachu is your starter Pokemon, you're able to get the other starter Pokemon of this generation. Since I can't evolve Pikachu, and I'm sure you can tell that I'm keeping the starter Pokemon, let's see what my party's looking like. I know it's very basic, but I'm keeping all 3 starters, so that's half of my team, and I'm sure the community is split on this, but I wanted to keep my Pikachu for the fun of it. He's definitely the weakest part of my team, but it's worth it. And for the biggest part of my team, and when I say big, I mean big, but you know I had to catch the homie Snorlax, one of the laziest and coolest Pokemon. To make him even cooler, I named him Biggie. I'm sure you can tell by now that I like to name my Pokemon, and I even name my rival with a very fitting name, a part of the game that can make it feel more personal and fun to replay. Good thing there's a tutorial in the beginning of the game, and Pokemon is pretty simple to learn, but knowing the game and having experience definitely helps with stuff like training, using TMs correctly, going to Pokemon centers often, and creating the Dream Team. I wanted to make the Dream Team without any legendaries, so I picked a Pokemon that's basically a legendary, and no, I'm not talking about Arcanine. My goal was to get a Dratini, but you get it pretty late in the game. Do I actually evolve it into a Dragonite before beating the game? Well, wait to find out. But yeah, that's the Dream Team I was going for. I know the 3 starters are basic and even hurts the replayability of the game, but I think it's a cool and fun option. It also makes it so Red and Blue are different experiences, only having 1 starter in those games, so I like having the option for 1 or 3 starters for Generation 1. I'm also pretty good at pacing myself when it comes to playing Pokemon. I don't play these games all the time, so it feels fresh every time I do. If you play Pokemon Yellow over and over, there's not too much different you can do to switch it up. At least with Red and Blue, you can pick different starters. That's where your imagination and being creative can make each playthrough different. Normally I like using legendaries, but this time I didn't want to. Maybe some of you choose not to use a starter at all for a real challenge. That type of replayability is up to you. For me, Pokemon is the type of game you play every few years, maybe every few months. Like I might play Gen 2 in a few months, but I won't play Gen 1 anytime soon. Not including a remaster though. I might play one of those. I'm just letting you guys know how casual I am and where I'm coming from. I've been playing Pokemon for over 2 decades now, but I think it's best enjoyed casually. I'm not gonna lie though, I don't always play Pokemon, but when I do, I'm kind of obsessed with it. It's a fun, crazy balance of pacing myself and being obsessed. It also just helps to be interested in the game world you're playing in. If you're playing a game with lots of lore like Pokemon or even an Elder Scrolls game, it can make it more interesting being in certain areas or talking to certain people. You know, I like going from city to city, talking to NPCs and seeing if they have something to give me or what they have to say. It helps feel like you're a part of this Pokemon universe. I always thought it was fun to compare Pokemon to real life and seeing where the similarities and differences are. Obviously, there's a lot of differences, but it's cool to see how they ground the Pokemon universe in reality. Like fishermen catching water Pokemon instead of real fish, or using Pokédollars instead of the Japanese or US currency, and they mention the moon landing. But one of my favorite doses of reality from Pokemon, and one of the darkest, and I'm sure you can see where this is going, is Lavender Town, one of the most haunted towns in all of Pokemon. This is where Pokemon are laid to rest because they didn't faint, motherfucker, they died. And the more you learn about it, the darker it gets, like Team Rocket killing Cubone's mother and Cubone wearing its mom's skull. My heart goes out to Cubone, but this is the type of thing I didn't think that deeply about as a kid, and it hits even harder as an adult. The story of Pokemon can be pretty simple and childlike, but like I said about comparing Pokemon to real life, there's gonna be some dark sides to it. Like Team Rocket killing and selling Pokemon for parts, and Team Rocket money laundering in the casino. Hey, shout out to Nintendo for teaching these kids some real shit. Well, other than those extreme parts in the story, I think it's pretty simple and gets the job done. It starts with you catching Pokemon and doing research for Professor Oak. That's where Gotta Catch 'Em All came from, I think. But then you have to beat gym leaders, which feels like its own part of the story, and not to mention your good old rival who won't stop talking shit. It's a good progression seeing him throughout the game getting stronger and stronger and being one step ahead of you. These all feel like their own ways of being part of the story that come together really well. Like Team Rocket getting in your way so you're beating the bad guys while having your own personal goal of catching them all and getting gym badges. The gyms in this game are probably as iconic as it gets. It doesn't get any more classic than Brock and Misty. I also think Lieutenant Surge and Koga are pretty cool, especially how Koga becomes an Elite Four member in Gen 2. Not to mention the 8th and final gym leader. It's a fun mystery that you don't know who it is until the end of the game, and once you do find out, it's a pretty interesting plot twist. And going back to the whole catch 'em all part, yeah, you can't catch 'em all. There's a few roadblocks that'll likely stop you from catching them all, like needing to trade to evolve some Pokemon, and simply having certain Pokemon not available and exclusive to Red and Blue. I always thought that was pretty funny, but to me it was never just about catching Pokemon. It's more about crafting my perfect team, but that's why I really like Professor Oak's aides. No, I mean his assistants. His assistants reward you for catching Pokemon, which is a real reason to catch random Pokemon. That's what I meant. But a big problem with that in Gen 1 is not being able to see which Pokemon you've already caught while in a fight. But other than that, it's a really good system to encourage the player to catch them all. Speaking of catching, we might have to get into some of the criticisms and weird parts of the game because for one, catching Pokemon does not work how it should. Damaging a Pokemon barely helps that much, but having a status effect like Sleep or Poison helps a lot. And not to mention that Great Balls can be better than Ultra Balls. I even caught the most insane Pokemon with a Great Ball on my first try. It's so insane that I have to tell you at the end of the video. And don't get me started on stats and status effects. The special stat is extremely strong because it includes both your special attack and special defense. Speed is also really strong because more speed means more likely to crit. And oh boy, crits can be crazy in this game. I promise you when I say moves like Slash and Razor Leaf crit every single time. Moves like Wrap and Fire Spin can be frustrating in their own way. It's just annoying, as well as status effects like Sleep and Confuse. When you fall asleep in this game, the turn you wake up counts as your turn, so if the enemy Pokemon is faster than you, they can keep making you fall asleep and it's just broken. That's why bug and grass Pokemon can be very annoying in the early game with all these status effects including poison. And it's not exclusive to bugs, a stupid bird might sand attack you in the eyes, so that's not very fun. And most of the other complaints have to do with the lack of information and features and needing to do some tedious things because of that. Like your PC can only hold up to 20 or 30 Pokemon, so you have to manually change boxes so you can continue to catch more. And I really like the whole TM-HM part of the game and how that works. It's just annoying how you have to almost use the TM to see what it is, and if you want to know what it does, then you're out of luck. Gotta whip out good old Google. So I did spend a good amount of time researching random TMs and making sure my Pokemon had good moves. Something else that can be a time waster, but honestly isn't a complaint with me, is all the caves. I've heard this criticism from other people, but I personally don't mind because I like the challenge of making it through the cave, being smart with my Pokemon and items, and making sure I'm prepared ahead of time. But I get why that's a complaint. It can be very annoying getting lost in a cave, especially without a rappel, but it's fun knowing these caves like the back of my hand, so most of them aren't too difficult. I only had problems with the very last cave. Some of them can take a lot of time, but that's when fast forwarding can be your best friend. But this is when I have to admit that I'm using an emulator. Yeah, I admit it. I think this is worth mentioning because it makes one of the criticisms not as bad. This is also a test to see if Nintendo is on my ass. If they're listening, I had to get the emulator on my phone because I've always said Pokemon would be the best game on the App Store. The same way they did Minecraft, Grand Theft Auto, and even Call of Duty is what Nintendo should do with Pokemon. It would easily become one of the most sold mobile games. The first gen is already one of the most sold games of all time, but since I can't, here we are. Nintendo, please have mercy. And let me know if this video looks alright since I'm using footage from my phone. I also heard this game is held together by sticks and glue. Kinda like this video, but if you play the game like normal, you shouldn't notice. There can be a lot of glitches if you go out of your way for it. In a funny way, it adds replayability for the type of players who enjoy glitches, but luckily you can ignore most of these and they're non-issues for me. I also wish this game had more endgame content, but it's only the first generation. Luckily, this turn-based combat you can play at your own pace isn't truly outdated. It's not fully polished and it can have this empty feeling sometimes, but it's still fun and a classic. But now that we got the criticisms and other stuff out of the way, let's look at some of the more exciting and badass parts of the game. I've been trying to keep the gameplay in order for the most part, and now, let's catch some legendaries. The original trio of legendary birds are iconic and the first legendaries you get your hands on in all of Pokemon. Even as a newer player, you can feel the strong presence of a legendary Pokemon. Having to find them in challenging areas and seeing them stand there tells you some shit is about to go down. This is one of those times where your imagination can make these fights seem like the most important thing in the world. Even though I didn't plan on using them, it felt like a big deal trying to catch them. Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres. I actually recently learned how they got their names and it blew my mind. Arctic Uno, Zapdos, Molten Trace. It's just their type and number in Spanish. Absolutely genius. And did you know that Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan are based off Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan? That's the classic Pokemon design that I love. I don't know anything about these new Pokemon. I stopped playing at Platinum, but I respect Black and White from what I've heard. But now that we've captured the legendary birds, which was the first real challenge in the game, it's time to defeat the Elite Four. The Elite Four is the final challenge to see if you're really the badass trainer you think you are. And we're gonna make this a little harder to show how badass I am. You see, a lot of people like the Elite Four because it's the first place you can really grind money and train your Pokemon with trainers, but what if I told you I wanted to beat the Elite Four on my first try? So that's exactly what I'm gonna do. And I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty difficult and included a lot of restarting the game. I was underleveled by about 10 levels, but I was determined to beat the Elite Four without losing a single time no matter how many restarts it took. I just had to figure out different strategies and which Pokemon to use for each Elite Four member, and like I mentioned earlier, I had to do some training and used all of my rare candies, so I finally got my Dragonite in time for the Elite Four, so you know I was ready. Lance isn't the only one with a dragon. I really like how epic these battles feel and how everything leads up to this. Definitely one of my favorite parts of the game. And it comes with one of the biggest plot twists in the game along with the 8th gym leader, and that's your rival being the champion you have to beat. This makes for the hardest and most intense trainer battle in the whole game. Remember that asshole who's been taunting you all game? He's your final boss, and the most satisfying part about it is when you finally beat him knowing you're the Pokemon champion and rubbing it in his stupid face. It was frustrating, but it was worth it. Then you have your glory moment that is the Hall of Fame. This part always felt like winning a championship and seeing the team that helped you get there. Let me know what you think of my team. It took me about 22 hours and 2.5 weeks to do it without any legendaries and without losing the Elite Four once. I'm finally back in my hometown and beat the game. Or did I? There's just one more thing left we have to do. I know a lot of you see where this is going, but I actually didn't know that you can catch Mewtwo until recently. I thought it was like Deoxys in Pokemon Emerald and that you just couldn't get it anymore, but I think it's perfect that you can catch Mewtwo after you beat the Elite Four. This is when you have to deal with the hardest cave in the game with some strong ass Pokemon. I've been here on Fire Red, but it hits hard being in this cave for the first time. It reminds me of the good old days when you'd hear rumors like catching Mew under the truck, except this feels like a rumor being true, and the little kid in me is excited. But it hits even harder when you first see the beast that is Mewtwo. He's just standing there waiting for you. The strongest Pokemon in the fucking game. And this is something I made you guys wait for until the end of the video. You have no idea how shocked, surprised, and excited I was when this happened. And it sounds crazy saying it out loud, but I caught Mewtwo on my first attempt with my first Great Ball that I threw. Can you believe that shit? I was at the edge of my seat in disbelief. It felt like all the stars aligned and that Arceus was on my side to make that happen. I think I made my younger self proud for finally making it in that cave and catching Mewtwo with style. And that's where one of the most classic games of all time ends. It felt like the perfect ending, beating the Elite Four without losing and catching Mewtwo with my first Great Ball. Look at me flexing that I still have my Master Ball after getting all these legendaries. And I finished the game rich as a bitch. Too bad I can't get the original Mew legitly, but that'll just have to stay a mystery. I enjoyed my journey through Kanto a lot and had a trip down memory lane. I just love the original 150 Pokemon. I'm not as interested in the newer Pokemons. The last one I played was Platinum and Soul Silver, but I'm definitely looking forward to Gen 2 and one day looking at the remasters for Gen 1. But the first generation was a good foundation and a great start to one of the best, if not the best franchise ever. It might be a little buggy or old, but it's nostalgic and there's so much that makes me say yes. One of the most iconic games of all time is still worth playing.